All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Soccerex, and welcome to our session here today on budget-conscious digital transformation and operational excellence. I'm joined by 2 absolute experts in the field who I'll introduce in just a moment. But to introduce myself, I'm Mitch Heath, co-founder at Teamworks. For those that may not know Teamworks, we're the operating system for elite sport. We work across 5 continents, 5,000 teams at the collegiate, professional, and Olympic level. And ultimately, our job is to help those teams leverage tech to create a better operation, to streamline their work internally and streamline everything they're trying to achieve on the sporting side. Now, I spend a lot of my time talking with teams about their tech strategy, talking with teams about how they get from point A to point Z, how they build a tech vision, and most importantly, how to do that in a budget-conscious way, right? Good tech is not just about spending more money or talking to every vendor at a booth and buying what you like. It's about crafting a strategy that ultimately saves you money in the long run. And especially with the pressures of the last couple years, what the pandemic has done to a lot of clubs and leagues financially, we want to make sure teams are well positioned to spend their money wisely. And I've brought 2 panelists today who have done that as well as anyone in the world. So I want to introduce you to Katya and Paul. Katya representing Arsenal Football Club today, and Paul representing US Soccer. And they're going to each speak to us on some key topics in the digital transformation space. We've been proud to partner with these 2 groups as well as a number of others across the soccer landscape, from Major League Soccer to the USL, groups across the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A, so on, as well as countless collegiate soccer teams here in the United States. Our game plan for today: Paul is going to kick us off with a discussion of tech vision. If you're thinking in your organization, whether you are on the sporting side, whether you're in a commercial division, any part of the organization, as you're thinking about where do we need to go from a technological perspective, how do we invest in technology in a smart way, Paul's going to talk us through kind of a framework for how you can think about that, how you should be thinking about how do we build a tech stack, how do we make sure the right pieces are fitting together, how do we make sure we have a long-term plan. And then we'll turn it over to Katya, who will talk nuts and bolts for us on, once we've identified those needs and have that vision, how do we then start selecting the partners we want to work with? How do we implement those solutions well? How do we make sure they're being adopted within our organization so that we're getting maximum value out of the solutions that we select? So I want to start it off by passing the mic over to Paul Anderson. Paul's going to talk us through, as I said, tech vision, but most importantly here from a holistic standpoint, as opposed to just kind of patchwork tech solutions. Paul, how do we build a holistic tech strategy?
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, so you see on the slide it says taking a holistic approach to your technology vision. So what do we mean by technology vision? So hopefully in any organization that you work in, whether it's a club, a league, a federation, you have a lot of technology needs across a lot of different areas. So for the purposes of this conversation, when we say your technology vision, we're thinking about how do you meet the needs of all of your staff across all of the different areas you work in? What are all of the systems that you're going to use? At the end of the day, you're going to have to justify to someone, why do we have 12 different systems or 15 different systems? Could we have fewer? Or do we have gaps? Are there things that we need that we don't have today? And you need to be able to justify that. And what do we say when we mean holistic? Well, hopefully this approach is not just designed for IT professionals, system engineers. This is a way of approaching your decisions about technology where you're really thinking from a bigger perspective, approaching it from a functional perspective, something that you can think about before you've made decisions like, what cloud provider are we going to use? Are we going to be working in Amazon Web Services? Or before you get to the fun decisions where you're thinking about performance analytics. You have to start from a simpler place. So that's what we mean when we say holistic. So the way we often approach this is by thinking of 2 key pillars, and that's starting with your users and starting with data. At the end of the day, any technology system you have, it has to be usable by people. So you have internal users and external users. You have your staff, and then you may have customers or other external stakeholders that have to interact with your systems as well. Sometimes these may need to be different solutions, but when we're thinking from a budget-conscious standpoint, anytime you can solve the same problem or work for multiple groups with the same solution, then you're reducing redundancy. So it's always important to think about how your different user groups overlap. Really simple example with the Federation would be how we approach education of coaches and referees. They do a lot of things differently, but at the end of the day, they both need to interact with educational programs. And so we found ways to say, well, can we solve that need with the same system rather than having two separate ones? So we're already making headway there in terms of having a more holistic vision and looking at ways to reduce cost. Now, at the same time, you will have some business lines that have completely unique needs. So again, a really easy example could be how your scouting department, if you're a club or a federation, they're going to need to perform operations on player data that it will never be needed by your commercial department. So there may be systems and solutions needed there that don't work for anyone else in your organization. And you still need those, but that's not an opportunity to look for overlap. So you got to look at across your entire organization, find opportunities for overlap, but also recognize where you do have unique needs and you need point solutions to do very specific things. And finally, what we'll explore on the next slide is this concept of user journeys. How do users move through your organization? You know, for US soccer, players at one point exist as part of a master data set, but at another point we may need to scout them. So they move from one system to the next, they become interesting to one department, and at another point in their journey, another department. And so you can think about how users, just like sets of data, move across systems or move across your departments. That helps you think about your whole user journey and your whole tech stack across multiple systems. Just as important as users is data. There's a catchphrase I have up here, which I use a lot, which is that better data leads to better insights, which leads to better decisions. At the end of the day, data is just numbers. It doesn't actually give you anything. It's what you decide to do with it. The data itself isn't intelligence. People have to look at it and then make decisions. And it helps if you think about your data sometimes as separate from the systems themselves. You know, as I said on the slide here, that your front-end applications, the tools you use to do the job are replaceable. You will have to replace many of them at some point. But a lot of your data is not replaceable. So as you move from one system to the next within your stack, and over time, as you replace a tool, you're going to have to hold on to a lot of that data. So any opportunity you have to think about how your data is separate from a system, and you can focus on always having clean data despite what system you may be using, that's going to give you more efficiency in the future. So we'll take an example, a specific example at US Soccer about how we use a user journey to think about multiple systems and look for opportunities to either find overlap or where we have specific needs. When we think about players at US Soccer, now these are players that eventually may play for one of our national teams. They go through many stages of their career, and at different points, we have different departments that are interested in thinking about them and performing operations on that data. So we can walk through the stages here. The largest set of players are those unidentified, which is just every single player in the world that could ever eventually play for one of our national teams. And at that point, any data we have on those players is only going to live in a master data system. And that's going to follow them throughout their entire journey. They're always going to exist in that system. But at some point, we need to take additional actions on that player data. For us, that's the moment at which we identify them. We make a decision. This is a player we're interested in scouting the first time or for many times. And at that point, we need to do things on that data that we can't do inside a master data system. So a new system must be introduced. And that's where we start thinking about a system for talent identification. And then I won't go through every piece, but you see on the slide that they go through different phases of the player's journey throughout their career. And eventually, we can't do everything we need just inside a talent identification system. So then we reach the systems that are only used by our national teams, because there are things we do at that level that we don't do when we're just trying to do talent identification. So we can look at this journey as, okay, across the whole lifetime of the player, we need systems to fit into these three categories. It may not just be exactly three systems, but we need to understand which one of these categories they fit into. So what are some key takeaways from this approach to a technology vision? It's that no one platform will do everything for you. There are a lot of vendors out there that might try to sell you something that says this will solve all of your department's needs. It does scouting, and it does tactics, and it does medical, and it can also work for marketing. But our experience has been is that systems that try to do absolutely everything for you are going to fall short in some of those areas. So it's really more successful to focus on your user groups in those different business functions and their different needs. Now, if you can find overlap, that's great, but you do have to be honest with yourself about when a business line has specific needs. Next, that the journey of your users or subsets of users, which again, could be stakeholders like athletes or customers, that can function as a data governance roadmap. As those users and their data move between systems, that helps inform who is going to perform operations on data, what operations are allowed in what systems, and when does that happen, connecting you all back to master data, which helps you appreciate how your data moves through your entire stack. And finally, that being budget conscious about digital transformation isn't just about spending less money. If you're given the approach to say, our spend on technology today is X, and for the next fiscal year, we just want it to be 3/4 of X, most likely you're going to end up cutting solutions that you need to do important work, or you're going to be using substandard solutions. So it's much more effective to approach that from the standpoint of how do we do more with less, or do more with the solutions that we already have. Teamworks for US Soccer is actually a really interesting use case that we took this kind of approach to figuring out where it fits. For Teamworks, we started with a problem where we had a problem we needed to solve for our youth national teams. Now that's players and staff. We had a challenge managing communications and scheduling across over 20 different teams, all of our youth teams, the extended national teams. And how do we manage that in a way that we weren't managing well 4 or 5 years ago? So we asked ourselves these key questions. Well, what part of that journey are we solving for? And it was that last step where they're in national teams. Well, why can't we solve it with the tools that we already have? And it was pretty simple that, well, the tools we have for messaging and scheduling are all designed for internal staff, your Outlook, Slack, things like that. Players coming into youth national team camps or part-time staff helping at those camps, it's not efficient to spin them up inside those solutions. Every time they come in, we may see them in 1 camp, we may see them in 5 camps, we may not see them for many months at a time between camps. So we don't have a solution that solves that problem. And then we ask, how does anything we look for, how is it enabling us to do more with less? Again, it's not about just spending less. And so why did we choose Teamworks? Well, mobile first was a big choice. Athletes, we already know they're on their phones all the time. So something that is mobile first is going to help us be the most successful in getting them to use it. Finally, it's scalable. Whether this is a team camp that has 20 players and staff or 50 makes no difference, and it's repeatable. If we teach players how to use this system when they interact with us, when they come into a U17 camp, if they come in 5 times over the entire cycle, or if they stay with us over the next 5 to 10 years through many of the age groups, hopefully all the way up to the senior team, we only have to teach them how to use it once. So we're saving a lot of time. And finally, the global infrastructure. With realizing that this was focusing so heavily on mobile, we made the decision that we could invest at the time in the infrastructure to power, mobile text messaging and calendar sharing across the entire world, regardless of where our teams are traveling. And Teamworks had that infrastructure in place. So we really saw this as a great way to solve the problem that we had, and it fit into the user journey exactly how we wanted it to. So hopefully this is helpful to think about how you approach technology, thinking about all of the systems that you have and how you can do more.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Paul. And I think this is critical before you go out and buy anything, invest in a solution, starting with this framework or whatever your kind of strategic framework is going to be is critical, right? Having your vision, having your path laid out. But then we get to the next step. Okay, we have our needs, we've mapped our user journeys, whether it be for players, for staff, for fans, all our constituent groups, and now it's time to meet those needs with solutions. And that's really where Katya's expertise comes in. How do we go out and pick the right vendors, the right partners who are going to not only meet our need today, but set us up for long-term success? And so I want to turn it over to Katya to give you some best practices on the next phase of this journey.
Thanks very much, Mitch, and thank you so much for having me here today. So I do want to talk about choosing the right technology and ensuring the long-term success. I I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I tried to summarize it into 3 key areas and some key considerations within those areas. So wanted to talk about the initial phase, so the initial assessment or initiation phase, where we're looking at what operational challenges are we trying to solve here? So what are the pain points within your business unit? Can those pain points be measured? Can they be quantified? So a few years ago for us, that meant looking at the way we communicate within our first team, so with our players, our playing staff, and at the time we realized that we have so many different ways of communication, from WhatsApp, emails, messages, in person, on the screen, in passing, at the training grounds, but there was no single version of truth. There was no centralized communication. And that's where we thought, okay, so to streamline our operational processes, we need to look at something that is much more aligned and centralized. So can technology help us on that user journey? And at the time we thought, absolutely. So we looked at what is available on the market. We looked at technology that was already in place within our business. So can we utilize the technology already used within the club for this purpose? And lastly, at the cost-benefit analysis. So what is the benefit of bringing new tech or extending existing tech? So we went from an initial assessment of identifying our operational challenge, identifying the need for technology, understanding the market, understanding the internal framework, and identifying the benefit of bringing that technology in. So moving on to, if you like, a scoping phase, so selecting the right technology partner. So 4 key things that I wanted to talk about: internal requirements and constraints, market assessment, IT security, and sustainability and longevity. So from a requirements and constraints perspective, I think it's really important at this point to make sure that you've got your business requirements figured out, you've got your key business stakeholders across this. Do you know what your timelines are? Do you have a budget for this project? So, and looking at things like timelines sometimes could be a really complex. So if you're looking at our first team operations, introducing new technology throughout the season is pretty impossible. So you only have a really short window of opportunity to bring new technology between the season. Market assessment. So we've already got an idea of what's out there. We've already done our market research. So this is where you'd want to engage 3 to 5 technology providers to understand how they can best cater for your needs and select a partner. So IT security is an interesting one because I feel a lot of the times IT security can be missed out and actually not considered as part of this process at all. So having a robust security assessment is absolutely non-negotiable for us in selecting a technology partner. So having your security needs aligned with your technology partner is critical. And last, sustainability and longevity. So the solution must work for you today. So you've got your key business requirements, you've got your immediate needs, but also how do you look at 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line? What are the other technology within your estate? Do you look at alignment of technology? Do you look at integration? Are there any other areas of the business that you might want to extend that technology to? So again, for us, in terms of the communication side of things, we started with the first team, but ultimately the goal was to extend it across all of our football teams, so across our academies, across our women's team. So think further than just your immediate needs. And the last slide for me is on implementation and user adoption. So again, 4 key things: engagement, buy-in, accountability, and collaboration. So bring your business stakeholders on board as early as possible. Make them accountable, make them responsible. bring them along the journey with you. So from a buy-in perspective, when you're looking at technology, again, make sure your business stakeholders are in the room with you for that. They're sitting through all the demos, they're understanding what the technology can offer them, and ultimately help you choose the right technology partner that works for them. Accountability, so once the technology is in, ultimately, again, your business teams are going to be the ones driving that technology, are going to be the ones using it day in, day out, understanding how it works, what works best for them. So make them accountable, have that technology live within your business team, supported by your technology team. And the last point I want to leave you with is collaboration. So it's not just about bringing the right technology in and you've plugged it in, it works, great. It's about continuously working with that technology partner, understanding what the roadmap is for that technology, understanding your requirements that might change down the line, and how do you continue to engage, continue to work with that tech provider to have that long-term success.
And I love ending on that point, because as the tech provider to clubs, federations, leagues, that's what we love, right? We want to build that long-term partnership and really make it a true partnership where we're growing together for the success of the organization in the long term. I want to throw some curveballs at you guys, if you're okay with that. Some questions that I have in follow-up to what you've presented, and questions I'm sure the audience has. What Paul and Katya presented are fantastic frameworks, again, for whatever part of the organization you work in, whatever your budget is, given the organization you're at. But certainly, if you have specifics, please come and ask us at the end, right? If you're actively looking at, hey, what scouting solutions should we look at? We're looking at apps for our fans. How do we evaluate them? No better opportunity than now to pick the brain of people who have gone through that process. Katya, I want to start with you, if that's all right. You're the data protection officer for Arsenal.
That's correct.
Key topic, key need. Everyone knows it's important. Everyone knows they're supposed to be paying attention to it. Not that many groups do a great job. And I think a lot of times, if I'm the buyer, if I am a coach, if I'm in operations, if I'm in media, whoever I may be, many in the audience, oftentimes my approach is, that's your job. I'm going to find what I want, and then I'll pass it over to IT, and you can evaluate it and tell me when we're good to go. For people in that type of role on the business side, what should they be paying attention to? What are some of the red flags or maybe green flags for a potential vendor or partner before it even goes to a formal security review?
Sure. I think, as you said, data security, data protection is really key, especially when we're talking about player data, player personal data. I guess on the looking at the new technology, looking at the new tech providers, I think some of the key questions to ask, well, first of all, do you have a security assessment internally that you can share with your tech providers? Can you ask them to provide you with the information that you need as an organization? So as part of that assessment, I think key things for me to look out for are really physical security, data security. Are there any independent assessments that the tech providers completed? So, for example, ISO 27701, Cyber Essentials. Do they do annual penetration testing? Can you ask for the pen test results? What are the mitigation actions on the back of those pen test results? So again, having that communication, having that relationship with your tech provider, even as early as before you engage on a formal process, I think is really important, because that could give you a really good idea very quickly whether you want to engage with that partner.
Yep, I love it, doing it early, because I've talked with organizations who have gotten excited about the potential, or hey, this group is building this cool thing, and it never gets off the ground because it can't pass a security test, and better to know that up front. Paul, I want to follow up on a couple comments you made around kind of the budget-conscious nature of your approach. I think maybe in the past when budget was available, we could kind of get away with, hey, let's buy some cool things and add them to our tech stack. And I think the pandemic for a lot of organizations has kind of those days are behind us, right? Now we do have to justify a purchase. We have to make sure we have ROI. We have to make sure the value is there and documented. Talk about how you go about that. How do you think about ROI? How do you, whether it's whatever part of the organization the application might be intended to serve, how do you go about the process of evaluating it?
Yeah, for technology, it really comes down to, is it serving a department that is revenue generating or not? Or is the technology itself involved in an operation that actually does generate revenue? Because especially at the Federation, as a nonprofit organization, there's a lot of things we do that do not generate revenue. We have departments that are cost centers because we're spending money on our work, and we're not looking to make money off of that. So that's really the first question, is starting with, is this supporting an operation that is meant to generate revenue or not? If it does, well then you have a much easier task, because then you actually have the revenue that comes from that department's or that business line's operations that you measure against the cost of sourcing and licensing the technology and the ongoing implementation and collaboration costs. Now, if you're looking at an area that doesn't generate revenue, then you have to find other ways to justify that expense, okay? We're using this technology to perform operations. It's not generating any revenue, but perhaps is it enabling us to spend less on other things? Perhaps if we were to try to perform this same business function without this technology or with a different technology, would the costs be higher? So rather than generating revenue, does it lower costs, or could it increase output? Can it make your output more scalable? Some of the systems that we use, it's about, okay, using this technology, it's making it easier for our employees to do their jobs, which then enables them to do more of the same work in the same amount of time and do things faster. So really your ROI is that your employees and their programs are producing more with the same spend. So as I said, it's about doing more with less.
And I want to pick up and really pitch this to both of you, this doing more with less concept. For a lot of organizations, they've maybe bought however many systems over the past 10, 20 years, and new tech has popped up and they've added it to their tech stack. And now they're in a position to say, okay, if I want to buy something new, it probably needs to replace something I have, or I need to use what I have more effectively to meet the need. Can you talk about that process of almost deconstructing the existing tech stack or pulling things out of the existing tech stack to bring in maybe a new, more innovative, better technology to replace something we bought 10 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a challenge we face all the time, which is that a given department or business line has been using a certain solution for a while, and we were just talking about this actually, and you run into a challenge if data migration was not thought about. And so this is what I get into on the slide a lot of times, about that front-end solutions are replaceable. Yes, in a perfect world, when you pick a technology, you want that relationship with that vendor to last as long as possible, and you have to focus on that collaboration so that your requirements are evolving and then your use of it can evolve. But you also have to protect yourself against the fact that it may go away. You may need to decommission it. And so for me, one of the most key areas to focus on is, from the beginning, focus on the data being separate from the solution, so that if the front-end solution goes away, you don't have to worry. You already had a plan from the beginning how the data survives the migration.
Yeah.
We were talking more. Do you have more to say about that?
Yeah, I do actually. So a really good point, and absolutely thinking about, this is in a way the last thing you want to think about when you sign a contract with a new tech provider. You're excited, we've got new tech working, solving problems for the business, but actually having the right, if you like, termination clauses within the contract, thinking about termination of that contract, whether it's going to come in 2 years or 10 years' time, is really important. And one of the key things, as Paul mentioned, is data migration, because that's the most valuable element that you have sitting in that system. So how do you protect yourself from, down the line having a discussion with a tech provider you're moving away from, where they're saying, well, we can't provide you with your data because we just don't have any means for it, or the relationship's got soured, and they just don't want to. So having that part of your conversations from the onset, having all the termination clauses in your contract is really critical to that offboarding process down the line.
So we're having a breakup conversation on the first date.
Yes.
Here's one that I get from just about every club I meet with. I would love to invest in this area, I would love to innovate in this area, but I have a coach who's not tech savvy and I don't think I can ever get them on board. Or our head of medical, our team doctor has been here for 30 years, they do it a certain way, things aren't changing in that environment. And Paul, you talked about all the different users you're mapping, all the different personas you're catering to with different needs, different solutions. How do you balance that? How do you balance maybe those that are ready to evolve and lean into technology and those that maybe have different preferences, different needs, different learning curves?
Yeah, and Katya really nailed it in the buy-in phase of the implementation process. The more you can work directly with the stakeholders who are going to be using the technology and actually get their buy-in as early as possible. I mean, we're going through one project right now where we're extending the process of approaching a contract because we want to make sure that this department, that they can see in advance how a new solution is going to make their jobs easier compared to the solution that they have today. So really, again, it's just about working with the stakeholders as far in advance. Now, there's going to be sometimes, as you said, users that have different levels of savvy, different levels of comfort with different types of technology. And you do your best to address all those different needs. If you need to either meet with those people separately, so you present one approach to someone who might be a data architect or a software engineer, and a different approach to a coach, a player, a program administrator. Now, if that's going to take you more time, but if it improves your buy-in, that's going to make you more successful in the long run.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, Katya, in your ideal world,
I actually
you have something to add. Go for it. Go for it.
That as well. So I think, as well as to what Paul just said, I think it's really, really important to have. Well, first of all, your technology is not driven by an IT department, right? So it's your business needs, your business teams that want to invest, want to look at bringing new technology in. So find key stakeholders within the business team that will be your main on the ground resources to drive that technology, make them accountable, make them responsible, and make them help you roll it out across the wider team.
Got it. So your ideal world, you guys have built a vision, you have your needs mapped, you go out and source what you need to meet those needs. But in reality, you're going to walk down the exhibit hall and get approached by 15 different vendors, and I'm sure all your inboxes are full by everyone who wants to sell you something. How do you sort through that noise? How do you know what's worth your time? How do you know what's worth taking a look at? How do you maybe stay innovative and by looking at new tech that could really help you, even if it's not part of your roadmap or your plan?
Sure. I think, well, first of all, I guess you have some knowledge already of what technology is available within your industry, within the business areas that you look after. You have knowledge internally within your organization. So there is that I think element of knowing who are the key stakeholders, who are the key players on within your business market. So I think from I guess where you're coming at is as a tech provider, what are the tips that I guess us as a club can give you?
Sure.
And I think the one main one for me is really listening to the needs of your of the organization you're speaking to, because really often, you have a technology provider that just wants to sell the product, right? This is the product, this is what we want to sell, and they're not really hearing what your business needs are, and that to me is a no-no. So if I do meet with someone and there is that kind of push sell attitude versus, okay, let's try and understand what you need as a business, that to me is a no-go as a relationship.
Yeah, and then as the business itself, this is really why it's so critical that your technology staff can map their vision against the needs of all your departments and all of your business lines, is that you're using the technology to get your work done as an organization. So it's about, you take that holistic approach, and then your technology staff should know do we have all the solutions we need to perform all of our functions? And then constantly staying in touch with all the different business lines, what's working, what's not working, what needs to be improved. And yeah, then when any vendor approaches you, it's just the question of asking yourself, what part of our organization's work could this new solution that someone is coming to me with, could it help us do something better? And if it can't, then that's the noise, again, separating the signal from a noise.
Paul, I'm going to give you a tough one that maybe some folks in the audience are thinking. This all sounds great if I had US Soccer's budget, right? But I'm at a smaller club, this is what I can work with. How do I make the most of it? If I cut your budget down to 10%, how do you still achieve these outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's about focusing on the functional areas, the actual operations that the business lines are performing. Then it's not about, one budget, a large budget of 5x or 1x. If you focus on, okay, if a finance team is telling me, okay, your budget is being cut or it's not what you thought it was going to be, it really becomes about trade-offs. You say, these are the tools we currently rely on. If we're going to have to cut something, or if we can't go source something that we've argued that we needed, then there are operations that we just can't perform. And so it's about having that hard conversation with finance, so that if you got 5 things and that costs 5x, and you're being told now your budget is only 4x, well, it's prioritizing. What do you cut? And then sometimes it's cutting that, or sometimes it's just timing. It could be, well, here are all the projects we wanted to accomplish this year,
sure,
and it would cost 5x to do that. And if in this fiscal year we're only be giving a budget of 4x, well, then one of those items simply has to move to the next year. So then you work with the business line to say, we can't do all of these things right now, and so we may have to push some to later. So timing becomes a big part of it as well.
Katya, I want to pick up on timing, because I think one of the other constraints besides budget is how much can we do at one time, right? I want to implement 5 systems right now. That's probably not realistic to train all my users on 5 new tools. How do you think about implementation spacing to maximize adoption?
That's a really good question, and actually quite often and not is a problem in a multi-departmental, many business areas business. So my team looks after football technology, corporate, commercial technology. So what do you prioritize? So each business area screams the loudest that that's the technology that they need. So how do you prioritize time, resource? How do you prioritize budget? And I guess the one line I keep thinking of is what's the cost of not doing it today, right? So how do you and I guess in many ways is who screams the loudest, but also if we don't do this today, what's going to happen? So what are the top level absolute must priorities, and then what do you then kind of have time for it to do next, right? So what is your long-term strategy, and how do these priorities align with that long-term strategy? So high ticket items, and then alignment with your overall goals and strategy.
Katya, I want to stick with you on this because, I think something that compressed that timeline is the pandemic we've all gone through. And I think about the number of organizations that maybe it just wasn't part of their culture yet to really lean into technology, or they weren't really undergoing this digital transformation process. But overnight, they had to figure out Zoom or Teams or some web conferencing solution, and they had to figure out remote communication. And so we saw organizations that maybe weren't all that tech savvy before have to lean into them. And I know that Arsenal went through quite a bit of transformation with the staff, with new tech. Talk about how you navigated that, both from a kind of tech needs perspective in the new reality, but also culturally, how the organization changed as a result of the changing environment.
It's a good question, because if you think about the wider, like a whole organization as a whole, you're right. It's the changes were immediate with introduction of Teams and Zoom and the whole new way of working in this digital world. But also, how do you still continue bringing the right tech in for those teams that need it? So how do you continue aligning your your football technology? How do you continue looking at, again, strategy of, bringing operational tools, medical tools, performance tools, and what are the points of contact between those systems.
Got it. And Paul, I want to end kind of where you started. So you put data at the center of the strategy. As I think about the landscape, many of you have probably run into this. Data's everywhere, right? I've got a boot monitor, and I've got a heart rate monitor, and I've got 30,000 different data points that I'm collecting on players, on fans, on whoever. How do I even begin to prioritize that? What matters? What actually drives decisions or drives outcomes? What do I do with that big pile of data that I've managed to collect?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the simple and unfortunate answer is there is no one answer as to what data matters and what data doesn't. Every organization is going to base its own decisions on which data points actually matter based on what you want to do with them. As I said, that data is not, at the end of the day, it's just numbers. That's not actually, you have to decide how you're going to interpret the data and use that to make decisions. So you have to kind of start at the end of, well, what decision are you even trying to make? If you're talking about performance data on players, it could be decisions about playing time or recruiting or selection. And so the people that are going to be making those decisions have to come to an agreement about, well, how are we going to use this data? We're going to take these data points and we're going to decide that when they look like this all together, we're going to interpret that into some sort of truth, and that's going to drive a decision. So there is no one answer as to what data points matter. It's about the organization deciding what decisions are going to be driven by data, who's going to make those decisions, and then what data do you need in order to influence those decisions? How are you going to choose to interpret them? And that leads you back to then deciding what data points matter.
Got it. As we reach our last couple minutes here, I want to just ask you all to recap for us. So if let's say I'm a junior member of my organization. I am not a CTO. I am not a CEO. I'm in the first 5 years of my career, and I'm thinking about how I can influence my organization to move in the right direction from a tech perspective. What's my one takeaway that I should take back to my team or my organization?
And I would say the easiest takeaway is to always be thinking around the corner, thinking about, and as Katya said, it's not just about what your needs are today, to how your needs are going to evolve. And so I think back to, some of the earliest work I was doing at the Federation. It was about thinking about, okay, I'm using these systems to do certain things, but how many times am I going to have to repeat these tasks? And looking for ways to suggest to someone, hey, if we don't add a new solution here or look to iterate, improve on the solutions that we have, then I'm going to repeat this same process how many times in the next number of years, and that seems like a waste of time. Or, again, thinking about if we have this solution today, well, what if we lose it? What if it breaks? Or what if we need to replace it? What's going to happen to all this data? What am I going to do with it? Is there a risk there? And so it's really always about thinking about in the corner to risk, thinking down the road, and looking for building your technology vision around not just getting things done today, but moving you towards your longer term milestones.
Got it, love it. And Katya, your takeaway for a non-technical member of a team?
I would agree absolutely with everything Paul just said, but the other thing I want to add to that is be curious, look outside of the box. So it's not just your industry, look outside of your industry. So what tech is available elsewhere? So, being part of the football industry, we don't do everything best, right? So there are other industries that already have it figured out. What are they doing? So what can you look at that isn't just your immediate team, immediate organization, immediate industry?
Who do you look at most? What's your...
my background is retail, so that's actually one of the industries that's really close to me. So that's definitely a lot of ideas come from that world.
Love it. Well, I want to thank everybody today for joining us. Please do come up. We'll hang around and take questions. If you have specific advice you'd like for your organization, happy to chat with you. And then I just want to give a big round of applause and thank Katya and Paul.